Rob, welcome back, my man. On to week 9.
On to week 9. I can't believe we're halfway through the season already. I mean, at least the regular season. It's picking up quick, man.
Yeah, I know it's flying by. It's been fun, but I think we got a lot of talk about now that we're officially at or past the midway point, however you see it. But yeah, man, I'm pretty. I saw some of your notes beforehand. I got a couple questions for you before we get into it, but I hope you enjoyed it about dive back in.
Yeah, dude, it was a great trip. Needed it. Needed a little time off, and just happy to be back now and back in a routine and just doing our show again. So hopefully, bring some good content here tonight, and we have a couple good points to cover. But like you said, kind of kick us off, and whatever questions you got for me, if you want to go through our typical for real frauds and for debate, fire them at me. I'm ready for them.
So let's lead off with this because we've talked about these two teams a lot. I know they're in your for debate section, Packers, Bucs, but let's isolate them real quick. I just want to know your thoughts after the last couple of weeks on the Packers and Bucs. So obviously, I had to sway you a few weeks ago on why they would eventually turn it around. Last time we spoke, I'd kind of given up on the Packers, how they looked. And then Bucs again melted. Both of them sitting at 3-5. Just what's your opinion on what's going on with these two teams in general? Not just that they're bad, but just like what's going on with them. Do you think it's more of like an age cliff for these two quarterbacks? Is it their situation? I mean, everyone's constantly dissecting these. You and I have gone back and forth on these two teams a lot. Just give me what's two Hall of Fame quarterbacks sitting at 3.
It's really hard to tell because you think like Brady and Rodgers have been dominant in this league for what, 10, 15 years. I mean, Brady longer, but it's just weird to see like two teams that are typically very good, led by really good quarterbacks with a really good supporting cast. I'll say the Bucs have a good supporting cast offensively. Just struggling so much. And I know they both had tough matchups this past week, but I think since we talked about it 2 weeks ago, where you kind of tried to persuade me to get on the Bucs train or the Packers train that they're going to figure this thing out. I think they've went 0-2 in the last 2 weeks, both of them. So
yeah,
tough point by you, but yeah, I'm going to call you right out. But I still kind of stand by what I said. Like, I don't have all the answers. I'm not super in tune with the analytics of it, but they just don't look themselves. I mean, you look at Brady's numbers and it's like, yeah, Brady's numbers are fine. They look pretty good. The team's just not producing the way that they're typically producing. I know Leonard Fournette's kind of having a bit of a down year. Not to say that a running back has a massive impact on a team, but I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what's going on. I thought me and you were both very much so on the same page week probably 1-4 that the Bucs and the Packers are both going to win the division and be in the playoffs where they usually are every single year. It just has gotten almost worse as we've talked about it over the weeks. Brady and Rodgers, I feel like and I've said this a couple of times, like it just feels like they look a little tired, look a little disinterested. Brady's getting on his teammates a lot more out of frustration. I know there's a bunch of stuff going on in his out of football life right now with his family. So I don't know, that surely could have an effect on someone. But really it's very difficult to understand what's going on. I feel like they're running out of time to turn it around. I don't know how you feel about that. Like, it feels like we're halfway through the season now. We've seen them almost get worse as the week's gone on. That's usually not a good sign. So worries me a little bit. Have your thoughts changed at all? I know 2 weeks ago, you'd probably tell me that, or you did tell me that I should get on the train. Are you still on that train? Are you falling off of it? Or are you barely hanging on? Where are you at?
So where we left off, I was still on the Bucs train, and I actually still am. I still think that. So part of my thesis was they would eventually turn it around for reasons. Number one being that the 5th easiest remaining schedule. The Packers actually have the 10th easiest remaining schedule throughout the season. But the Packers don't have elite wide receiver play. They're not good where you really need to be good. They do have a good offensive line, pretty good defense, but that elite wide receiver seems to be harming Aaron Rodgers. And so part of my thesis with this show was that elite quarterback play covers up so much. That's kind of one of those obvious things, but this is one where I don't see the level of eliteness that we've typically seen from Aaron Rodgers. And without that elite wide receiver play to cover him up, like think Tyreek Hill and Tua, right? So Tua has elite wide receiver play from two wide receivers. I know Tyreek Hill is the number one grade wide receiver in the NFL right now. He looks incredible, but Jalen Waddle is a number one on a lot of teams, and he's tearing it up. So Tua has two elite wide receivers, good overall scheme, and pretty decent backfield with Raheem Mostert. I know Edmonds just got traded. He wasn't playing well, but they did just add Jeff Wilson. So they tend to elevate Tua. I think Tua is playing at a very high level. I'm not saying he's bad by any means or like a Daniel Jones level, but they are elevating him. Whereas it seems like Aaron Rodgers is not playing to that elite level that we're used to seeing him do. We've seen Rodgers elevate receivers. James Jones, some of those receivers that he had in the past, Donald Driver, some of those, Driver was with Brett Favre, I believe. But some of those elite receivers we've seen in the past were really elevated by Aaron Rodgers. And he's not elevating these guys anymore, right? So I think that's a massive problem. When I look at Tampa Bay, they do still have elite skill position players. Rashad White is coming on in the backfield. I don't know if they're going to give him more touches, but Leonard Fournette and Rashad White are just as good and talented as a lot of backfields, right? But then you've got these guys on the outside. You still got Godwin. You still got Mike Evans. These guys are still great wide receivers, and their offensive line coming into the season was supposed to be a big, big problem. However, they've actually ended up being about the 7th graded offensive line throughout this season. So the offensive line looks good. I'll give you the stat that makes me think they turn it around, because it tends to regress when you have all of these metrics going in your direction, right? So they've been moving the football a lot. They are actually 3rd worst in red zone efficiency, right, are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The thing that scares me about the Packers is how bad they are, and their red zone efficiency is actually 13th. So the Packers don't have a lot of room to improve. They're just not moving the ball. They're not moving the ball downfield to get in the red zone. When they get there, they're fine. They're league average, slightly above. But the Bucs are getting there quite often, and they're actually 3rd worst in the league when it comes to red zone efficiency. 45% overall this season. Over the last 3 games, they've been 30%. That is egregious. So the last 3 games where they've looked horrible, they have been 30% in red zone efficiency. They're just not scoring touchdowns. Now, you and I have covered a lot of fantasy DFS and all that. We used to do a DFS show. We know that especially with these talented teams and elite receivers, we typically see red zone efficiency regress to the mean. So for Tampa Bay right now, they actually are dead last the last 3 games in red zone efficiency with that 30%, right? And they're dead last by a pretty good margin over the last 3 games. So that's one of the reasons why I think, okay, at some point they're going to turn around. All that you said about Brady, he doesn't look himself. I don't think they turn around to the level that I thought they would in the past. But the Bucs are still one where when you just kind of put away the recency bias, they do have enough underlying metrics to say, okay, this team theoretically should go on a nice run and can still win this division, right? So that's part of it too, is we've kind of seen the Vikings almost run away with this division. I mean, what do you think Arthur Smith and the Falcons are going to run away with this division? It's not going to be the Panthers. It's not going to be an Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston. Right. Those teams are 8-9, 9-8 teams at best. Like maybe they get hot and find their way to 10 wins, but this division isn't that good. So some of it also hinges on the fact that they should almost make the playoffs by default at this point. So if they just regress to the mean a little bit, they'll make the playoffs by default. Now, I'm not even going to touch on the Packers beyond that, because the Vikings are 6-1, look great. The Packers really, really have to heat up and turn things around starting this week in Detroit. They've got a couple of very tough games. I think they still have the Chiefs left as well. They've got a more difficult schedule. I was actually surprised when I saw that theirs is 10th, 11th easiest moving forward. Or looks like it's right at 11th, 12th. Okay. Easiest moving forward. So, just beyond league average a little bit. I think they're going to struggle with that because they struggle with it so far, losing to Washington and just really, the Jets turned out to be better than we thought. But the Packers aren't one where I feel like I can make a good argument for some of those aforementioned reasons. But the Bucs are one where no, I'm not trying to sell you on them because of how they looked, but I do think that they have enough that are enough in their favor to turn this season around. Now they've actually got to do it. Whether or not they do it at this point is another thing. They actually have to do it. I'm going to say at this point, I think they do it, but at this point, I mean, what's their win total drop to? Probably like 8.5, 9.5 games at this point. I mean, the Bucs go 9-8, 10-7. They probably win their division. Is that good or meeting expectations? No, but at this point, that would be great for them. So that's kind of where I sit. I'm definitely not necessarily looking to change anyone's mind after the way they've looked the last couple of weeks, but that's where I sit with Tampa Bay. I don't know if you got any thoughts to close that out.
Well, I think that's a good point that you make. Like, I'm out on the Packers as well. I know I just said 2 minutes ago that I'm out on the Bucs, but that is a really good point that the Falcons are the only competition in this division, and all it takes to make the playoffs is to win your division. And they're only one game ahead. They're only one game ahead of them. They dropped one to them, so like it's definitely possible. And then we know what Brady can do when he makes the playoffs. So that's a really good point. That changes my perspective a little bit on it, but it's definitely something we have to see, and sooner rather than later. Because even if they're going 10-7 or 9-8, like they got to start stringing some wins together. They're 3-5, so they got to really put some wins together here going forward. And then, I mean, even if they, I don't know, I still feel, and it kind of brings me into my next point. Like, even if they make the playoffs, like I do like what I see out of the Eagles right now in the NFC. Cowboys, I still have above the Bucs and the Packers right now. So I'm just gonna assume. Let's just assume the Vikings win the division. Packers aren't making the playoffs, in my opinion, which is absolutely shocking to, I think, will be to most people. But even so, if they make it, like I think the Eagles are a juggernaut in the NFC, and I think they're head and shoulders above the Bucs even right now. Like, they're just playing with a swagger, playing competitive football, and just dominating those in front of them. And it's similar on the AFC side. I mean, the list hasn't changed from last week or 2 weeks ago. The Bills, Chiefs, and Eagles are the three best teams in the NFL, and I don't think that's an outrageous take. I think they are all significantly better than their competition right now, is what it looks like. And even the Bills and the Chiefs, I think are I don't want to say significantly better than the Eagles, but I think they're a tier up even. So regardless of whatever the Bucs and the Packers do, like I don't think they're going to make it much further in the playoffs unless Tampa Bay catches some really crazy hot streak and wins out the rest of the year and like is just an absolute juggernaut going into the playoffs. But that's very unlikely, and from what we've seen this far going forward. So,
and they got a tough one this weekend against LA. The Rams are traveling cross country. That's another team sitting there at the Rams are 3-4, I believe, right now. I mean, that's another team really in distress for a number of reasons, and I think offensively they're in much worse shape than the Bucs are, just due to injuries and all that. But I don't necessarily see the Bucs as a Super Bowl contender, even if they win out the division. We know what they can do if they get hot. Now, the last, I mean, you could also argue the other side of that. The last couple of years, the teams that got hot going into the playoffs and had a rough start to the season ended up going to the Super Bowl. Two of them winning it, Rams and Bucs, the last 2 years who played this weekend. They both got hot, and we're looking terrible early on in the season. Not this bad, not anywhere near this bad, but they were not looking great early in the season. They got it together and eventually strung along some wins and made a playoff run. Bengals last year got hot, made their playoff run and fell short. So we've seen teams get hot at the end of the season. Regardless of that being the flip side of the argument, I could see the Bucs doing everything I said in my shell of a defense for them a few moments ago, if that's what you want to call it. I think just more the reasoning on why they could improve or why they can turn it around. I think all of that can be true and them still not be a Super Bowl contender, because I don't see. I think all of that can be true and them not be elite. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. So you got any other thoughts on your four real teams? I know Bills, Chiefs, Eagles. I agree with you there. those have been the top three teams pretty much all season. Really, the Eagles have. I know really the Eagles have been on that list for us early on. I know we kind of kept them in the for real, and there was a little more debate around them for a
Hmm.
bit, but they look incredible. They've got a phenomenal roster on both sides of the ball, and everything. So I'm certainly with you there. They've looked incredible, and I think they're the team to beat right now in the NFC. Their win total actually moved to 14.5 right now.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, pretty
Wow.
crazy. Up from I think 8.5 to open the season, or 9.5. So
Yeah, I think it was hovering around 9 because I remember talking to the Eagle Up guys,
yeah,
what their expectation was, and I think they said they need 11, 12 wins. So they're on pace. They're pretty on pace for that. And yeah, the Bills and the Chiefs again tier up from everyone else in my opinion. If one of them was in the NFC, I probably even with the 7-0 Eagles would still pick the Chiefs or the Bills if one was in the NFC to be my Super Bowl matchup.
hmm
That obviously can't happen, so that's kind of why the Eagles are there. I mean, they're 7-0, they look really good, so that's part of it. But I still think the Chiefs and the Bills are ahead of them. And then that kind of leads me to my point about I think I made this point 2 weeks ago when the Titans and the Colts played, where I said the Titans feel to me like the definition of what the fraud list really is, where you have a team that has a good record, that looks good on paper, maybe, but they're not really contenders. And that's kind of my opinion of the Titans. And we'll really see, we'll test that theory this weekend because the Chiefs play the Titans this weekend. So um, I think, I don't think it's going to be an absolute blowout, but I think we'll see why the Chiefs are real contenders and the Titans, in my opinion, are not. And we'll really see, who comes to play. And you never know. The Titans could shock them. They've had a good success against pretty good teams throughout the years, but I mean, to me, it's just hadn't like I sound like a broken record. Chiefs and Bills just so much better than everyone else, in my opinion, from what I've seen this year. Um, that kind of kicks off my frauds list, and then we talked about the Falcons already, sitting at 4-4 ahead of their division. I mean, we just talked about for 5 minutes how we think the Bucs are probably still going to win the division, so they're definitely frauds. I mean, they're another team that would be the
yeah.
definition of a fraud because, I mean, this is like, it feels like it's a miracle that they're in the lead of this division. And the division has just been so bad. That's why they're in the lead, in my opinion. Um, but I mean, like coming into the year, we predict them as a bottom 5 team. And now they're sitting atop their division going into week 9. Like it just seems odd. So it doesn't seem sustainable. And it feels similar to what's happening in Seattle as well. Like Seattle's in one of what is considered one of the tougher divisions in the NFL, with the Rams, Niners, and the Cardinals. But the Rams, Niners, and Cardinals have all underperformed this year, and in a season that we thought the Seahawks were going to be the clear 4th team in that division. Losing Russell Wilson, but Geno Smith has stepped up. We talked about it many times already the past couple of weeks. Like they're scheming him the right way. Like if they continue to do that, I think he can continue to succeed. But I think at some point the Rams and the 49ers find their stride, at least in their division, at least string some wins together. So I don't think the Seahawks are going to win that division. But right now they're in first place. So I know you've definitely had some thoughts about the Seahawks. Do you feel any type of way about them now going into week 9?
I just think they're over exceeding expectations. I think what they're doing is incredible. I think the way they're winning is what's incredible, right? So the up until the last couple of weeks, the Seahawks have had one of the worst defenses in the NFL. They had a bottom 5 defense. I think even that matchup between them and the Lions was at the time the two worst defenses, two worst scoring defenses in the league. And
Mm-hmm.
they're doing this with Geno Smith and the offense and offensive efficiency. Like that is completely flipped on its head. Historically, when you think about Seattle winning and being good, it's either Russell Wilson winning it in the fourth quarter or it's defensive led teams that had helped them make their Super Bowl runs years ago. Right
Right.
now, Rush dropped off. We're seeing that in Denver. The defense has not been good in several years in Seattle. And that's again why we thought they would be so bad. And the fact that they're doing it the way they're doing it is, I think it's truly impressive what Seattle's doing. I think when you look at the fraud list, the difference in Tennessee and Seattle is that we can call Seattle a fraud. And I agree with you. I don't think they're a legit competitor by any means. But what they're doing is incredible and very impressive. What Tennessee is doing is like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? They're still pulling this off. It's almost annoying at this point that Tennessee continues to win and grind out games the way they do because of their division, the way the schedule falls, and they continue to kind of receive this good fortune. You play who you play. You can only control so much, but Tennessee is one that you watch enough. You're like, okay, I've seen this story before. We're probably going to see them flop come playoff time. Like I've seen this movie before. Whereas Seattle's like a feel good movie, feel good story, underdog story. You're like, I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe what Geno's doing. It's impressive. He's the number 5 graded passer in the NFL right now. It's really impressive. So yes, both of those are frauds, but they're very different types of frauds to me. And the other thing with Tennessee is JT and I talked about this. I don't know if you listened to the betting show earlier this week, but when JT and I recorded and went over the opening lines, what was interesting about this game with Tennessee is that they've won 3 of the last 4 against Kansas City after being not underdogs to this level, not 12-point dogs, but I can see Tennessee going in there and making this a game. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a blowout. For some reason, we just always see the reason we think Tennessee is frauds is because they get up for these good games a lot of times. They pull them off in the regular season. They flop in the playoffs, and they also lose to these really bad teams. We saw it last year at times where they got exposed against bad teams, and come playoff time, they truly got exposed. They would get up for these big games in the regular season. We're going to see if they continue to do that this season, and that's kind of why the reason Tennessee is fraud. We think they're fraudulent is there's some historical evidence there, and the fact that their roster is worse this year than last year. So all those compound to saying, watch out for Tennessee this weekend. I don't think they beat Kansas City in Arrowhead. They did it a couple years ago, but we see them get up for these games. I think we come back next week. I want to keep that in mind and just kind of make that a conversation point if they are able to keep this game close. Because for me, they don't move on the fraud list. I think them getting up for the Kansas City game and flopping in the prime moments later on in the season is why we have Tennessee in this position. So I know that was a lot on those two teams, but that's just kind of how I feel about them. The Falcons, I talked about them earlier. Like that's why we think the Bucs can turn it around and win this division to 8-9 or 9-8. They got very lucky at 2 missed field goals against the Panthers. The Falcons are sitting here at 3-5, and the Panthers are first in the division if Eddie Pinheiro makes an extra point or a field goal in overtime. Yes, you can blame DJ Moore all you want, but dude's got to make a kick. So the Falcons to me are I don't know. They're definitely a fraud, but I don't even know if they're good enough to even be on a fraud list. I just think they're just not good. So maybe that's too hard on the Falcons, but their offensive line has been pretty good. It's been league average. They've ran the ball really well. They've been efficient there. Mariota has been a very efficient passer, so that's been good for them too. So they've definitely, I think the Falcons have overperformed to date, and they're one of the worst teams to me in the league. I think even if you look at PFS power rankings, they're sitting there at 27th, and I don't think that's crazy. But they do have the second easiest schedule to date moving forward. So I think the Falcons can grind out a few more wins. I think they will, but they are absolute frauds. I want to go back to your one about actually let's lead into Ford debate if you don't have any other thoughts on that, because I want to talk about the Cowboys. You had them as a for real a couple weeks ago. Before Dak returned, Dak is back, and now they've fallen out of your for real. Like, I feel like that's kind of flip-flopped. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I feel like you kind of convinced me a couple weeks ago, like that even though I thought them and the Cowboys, I still think the Cowboys are second in the NFC. I just kind of have really shifted my perspective on like who I really think can make it to the Super Bowl. And like, I don't know. I don't see them coming out of the NFC. I could definitely be wrong about that. Like they have looked pretty good this year, but I think the Eagles are better, and I think the Eagles are more competitive. I think the Eagles are getting better as the season goes on, and the Cowboys. I mean, the Cooper Rush won 4 of those games, so we're still got to see more out of Dak. So yeah, that's kind of my big reason. Like they can certainly move right back up. Like they slipped off, but you could see in my notes here it says like they're right on the cusp for real for me. Like I think the Eagles and the Cowboys are still 1 and 2. and I think they can compete. I just don't know yet. So that's kind of why they fell off. Like they could certainly be on again in a week or two here. I don't know yet. Um, One thing I did see about the Cowboys though, that I liked this past week was, and I've been saying it, and I feel like you'd agree as a Cowboys fan, like it's time to move off of Zeke and move
Oh
on to
my gosh.
this guy's incredible.
I I can't. I don't
Like
even know. It's gonna break me if Pollard walks and we're still paying Zeke like $15 million.
if we're still looking at the Cowboys as a contender, like you have a guy that is a game changer and another guy in Zeke, who is old and does not look the same and can really only hit a hole if it's huge. And we're still playing Zeke more snaps than Pollard when they're both healthy. So like Pollard looked incredible last week. Like you have to run this guy if you really want to consider yourself a competitor. You have to run this guy.
Oh my gosh, dude! I did you see that video of Chris Johnson and what's his name, Leonard White, whoever arguing that was about the Pollard
No,
and Zeke? That's how that would be me talking to Jerry Jones. Like it's crazy. You need to go find that clip. But they're basically going back and forth, and Chris Johnson is like, "What's basically why pay Zeke at this point? Pollard's better," and White's just like, it's like an old man yelling at clouds, stuck on Zeke. Like he runs against heavier boxes. He does this. He does that. Let me see Pollard do it for a whole game or something like that. It's just if you don't even need to look
we
at
did last week.
yeah. I don't. Well, thing is, you don't even have to look at numbers. Like, let's say you're an analytics person, right? And you and I enjoy diving into some of that, right?
Right.
If you just remove how much more efficient Pollard is, the fact that he's better from a broken tackles perspective, better yards after contact. He's a better receiving back. He's more explosive. He's a better one cut runner. All of those things. Like Zeke has him in pass protection. Sure, I get that, but we saw what he's able to do, and should be the backup. Zeke is the backup. Like and the sad part is I think a lot of Cowboy fans, myself included, have been saying this for a couple years. Like it's not like what I'm saying is and groundbreaking. I'm pretty sure 80 to 90% of people have seen this for a couple years and said this and have been proven in these
Yeah.
one-off Pollard games that he is much better than Zeke. Zeke is better in pass pro. Maybe he's better for the locker room. Blah blah blah. I don't even at that point like is that moving the needle enough when you watch Pollard and how good and explosive he is? It's just mind-boggling that they continue to pay some of these positions and players like Zeke that aren't the ones that move the needle. And I think that's continuously what has held Dallas back for like 20 years. I'm going to go off. Can I come to New York? I'll be a Jets fan. I don't even care. I'll be a
Hey
Jets fan.
man.
I'll take the pain. I'll bleed
Hey,
green.
look, we're on the come up right now. So I have some thoughts about that, but we are on the come up. So you can absolutely come over to the Jet side. I mean, you live in New Jersey, might as well.
I'm close enough. What's it like an hour and a half? I'm an hour and a half from the Meadowlands. Let's do it.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
see you
closer.
there.
It's
I'll
closer
see
than
you there.
Dallas, I'll tell you that.
What hurts more, Jerry Jones or Zach Wilson? What's the pain threshold?
Oh God, I can't even tell you. Like why don't we just jump right into the Jets? Because they fell off my for debate list after this past week. Like typical Jets fan, I am like just absolutely giving up. Not really fully giving up, but like I can't even get the words. Like melting down after what we saw from Zach Wilson last week. And you look at his numbers, and if you didn't watch the game, you look at his numbers, you're like, what? Why are you complaining? He threw for 300 plus, 2 touchdowns. He looked awful. Like that was the exact game plan. That was the exact way Belichick wanted him to play. Was stack the box against the Jets run game. And without Brees Hall, we are obviously not the same team, but stack the box and make Zach Wilson beat you. And he certainly couldn't. Like they just
Mhm.
looked absolutely lost. I mean, there's just so much. I can get into too much of it, but if you really want a full breakdown, I mean, James he did a good one on the Jet Up podcast. So go check that out. But I mean, goodness, like they're 5-2, and it feels like we're 0-7, like, after that past week. Like, it's just not good. Um, I don't know. I don't think Zach's the answer. I'm gonna say it. I don't think he's the quarterback of the future. I think he struggles, and I'm kind of tired of watching it, to be honest with you. Like, all the games that we won where we were 4-1, he had one good game, or he had one good drive against the Steelers that ended up winning us the game. But I mean, it's one drive when you're talking about it in comparison to the entire year. He was throwing like 100 yards per game when Brees was going off. So I mean, that's all I'm going to say about them. There's a couple other teams we want to jump into, and
I actually do have a
it,
couple
but
things on
there's just too much. Like, there's too much. I can't get into it.
let me leave the listeners with this on the Jets, right? So I began this show for a reason, saying part of my thesis was how elite quarterback play covers up so much. You know, we talked about Mahomes covers up that loss of Tyreek Hill, right? Hill has elevated guys, someone like Tua, and it's been very visible. Mahomes and the Chiefs, we talked about them being in a tier of their own with the Bills, and then there's a separation. Then the Eagles, another separation, and everyone else. That's what it feels like this season. Mahomes, elite quarterback play, has elevated that team and has allowed them to live without Tyreek Hill, right? They've had a pretty good offensive line. They've had a very good defense this year. All of those elements have helped. The Jets have the number one graded defense this season, according to Pro Football Focus. They have the number two graded special teams. We talked about that earlier this year. Why we were nervous is they're winning a lot with defensive and special teams. They were very, very good, and they've actually been the worst graded offense this season. Going back to the efficiency metrics I was looking at earlier, the Jets are the number 12 most efficient offense in the red zone. That's touchdown scoring percentage only. That's not field goals. This is the same metric I was looking at for Tampa Bay about why I think they regress to the mean. We're seeing the Jets and the number 32 graded offense regress to the mean. And over the last three games, they're next to last to Tampa Bay in red zone touchdown efficiency at 33%. Those two are the two worst the last three games, and you're kind of seeing them exposed. You're seeing Tampa Bay go, okay, they can regress to the mean. For the Jets, we're seeing that this team has been carried by Saleh, by turning around, by young confidence. Young confidence has no fear. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. That has helped. Incredible defense. I mean, the Jets, what they've done to build out that roster is incredible. Now, I'll give you this stat from Warren Sharp, again, about why elite quarterback play covers up so much. And you have to have elite quarterback play if you're going to go to the next level. You can deal with other roster spots being bad, but Zach Wilson's, according to Warren Sharp, tweet he put out this morning, his time to throw is worse this year than last year. He has the longest time to throw in the NFL. When I say worse last year to this year, I'm not saying his offensive line is worse. I'm saying he is worse last year than this year. He has the longest time to throw in the NFL. Okay, I know James and you guys got to go listen to them break this down because it was incredible. But his efficiency when holding on to the ball is also the worst of any quarterback in any season since at least the year 2000. Right. So, and go check out Warren Sharp for that. I got to credit him for that analysis. But that to me just sent off like a light bulb in my mind where I was like, sheesh. You look at some of these teams, elite quarterback play covers up so much. The Browns, right? The Browns have just fought tooth and nail this year. They have the number one graded defensive player, Myles Garrett. They have the number one graded offensive player, which is their offensive lineman, whose name I forget right now. They have the couple of I believe so. I'm totally blanking on the dude's name, but they have two of the highest graded players in the NFL right now, and they're 3-5. Why? Because they have Jacoby Brissett. Like you give some of these teams elite quarterback play with the talent that they have. It's an uncapped ceiling, and that's what you've seen with teams like the Bills. That's the difference between teams like the Bills. It's not just some coaching and scheme and all that, but it's also the fact that you've got to be able to find that guy. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles coming into the season where, like, if he's just slightly above average, the Eagles are winning this division. He's been borderline elite this year. And I actually want to get your thoughts on this right here before we move on to a couple of other teams. We talked about Geno Smith earlier. Geno Smith is the number 5 graded passer. We've seen some of these one-off seasons like Kirk Cousins and the Vikings there for a couple of years when he was elite. He put up elite numbers. That year, Case Keenum put up elite numbers. we see like one-off seasons of guys putting up elite numbers. Like Geno Smith have an elite season. He's not an elite player. Don't get me wrong there, but it's just interesting to see him put up an elite season and how big of a difference that is making on Seattle, who is far worse of a team than the Jets versus what we saw with Zach Wilson and everything on Sunday. Like it's totally flip-flopped. Like you give a one-off elite season to a talented roster or an elite quarterback to an above average to talented roster, and it's an uncapped ceiling. Or they're able to cover up what you don't have, and that's truly like, I mean, the difference in what's happened with the Jets over the last couple of weeks is, I know you don't want to dive into that any more than what I said here, but that's truly a damning number. But we're also seeing that across the league with some of these other teams where below average quarterback play is dragging down elite teams that have elite talent. So I think that's a serious problem, and that's why some of these 4 debate ones are certainly in here. But I kind of want to let you move on, and as we wrap up here, and move on to the Bengals, Giants. I know you got a couple other on here that you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, you make some really good points about the Jets there, and some other teams that struggle just without elite quarterbacks. Like it makes you ask the question, with the Jets roster, with everything else going on, like how good would they be if they had a quarterback that was top 10 or even top 15? Like how much of a jump would they take, And I made a joke the other day. I was like, we should trade Elijah Moore for Aaron Rodgers. But I mean, obviously
Incredible.
that would never, ever go through, but it would be absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, it's so important to have the quarterback. And I think when you look at the teams that are in the for real column, like the Bills with Josh Allen, Chiefs with Mahomes, and even the Eagles this year with a Jalen Hurts that's playing out of his mind, you need those quarterbacks. You've seen it in the last couple of years. The Rams needed a quarterback. They got Stafford. They won the Super Bowl. The Bengals, they got Joe Burrow. They changed their whole franchise around. And I actually want to jump right into the Bengals with that point. One thing the Bengals also needed that gave them the edge last year was Jamar Chase. And we saw, you've heard me the last couple of weeks talk about the Bengals and how I thought, or I still think, that they're going to go on a bit of a run here and make a case for that division title. I do think the Bengals and the Ravens are both going to make the playoffs. I think it's going to come, the 2 teams are going to come out of this division, are the Bengals and the Ravens. But my point being about Jamar Chase is the Bengals, without Jamar Chase, they were still not good. Like they still had a top 5 pick. I think they got Jamar Chase at number 4 or something like that. And people were questioning should they take Penei Sewell or Jamar Chase? Like their offensive line needs to change. Like they need to get better. They took Jamar Chase and their offense exploded to one of the most efficient offenses in the league. And they went to the Super Bowl, and he's dominated every game, and he still dominates. And then he misses one game against the Browns, who I think the Bengals are far better than the Browns, even with the Browns' talented roster. I'll take Joe Burrow over Jacoby Brissett any day, even though Brissett did play well. Anyway, the Bengals are better than the Browns. Without Jamar Chase, the Bengals were not as good as the Browns. I think Jamar Chase changes everything. Your defense has to scheme for him, and he's the most important person to stop on that team. And you just saw how important he is. I mean, even T. Higgins played well, but he's not Jamar Chase. So without Jamar Chase, the Bengals are not nearly as good. We saw it last year. It's spiked them up to a Super Bowl run, and without him in one game this year, they looked lost. So I think when he comes back, he's not on the IR. I think he's coming back in maybe a week or 2. So this is going to be a good test for the Bengals. See how far they can get. See how competitive they can be without one of their top weapons. So that's my thoughts on the Bengals. I still believe in them. I still think they're going to make a run. But the time is now, and without Jamar Chase, it's going to be a little bit harder. Next team I have here is the Giants. Giants at 6-2. They're another team like them and the Jets. Their streaks ended last week. New York kind of fell apart. Like everyone thinks the season's over. The Giants are not done. Like I still think the Giants are good. However, I don't think they're good enough. And I'm sorry. Like I know the Giant Up guys, me and them have been going back and forth over text. Like they think I'm out to get the Giants. I'm really not. I think the Giants are good. I think they're having a great year. I think Daboll's the guy. I think they're going to have a good future with him and Joe Shane. But I still think, as I've said multiple times this single episode, I still think the Eagles and the Cowboys are number 1 and number 2 in the NFC, and I don't think the Giants are number 3. Like, I think the Eagles and the Cowboys are definitely better. I think the Giants are going to run into some problems with them, and I'd love to be proven wrong, but that's kind of where I sit right now with them. How do you where are you with the Giants? I feel like a lot of people are back and forth on the Giants. Like, they believe, they don't believe. How do you feel about them? Like, I know 6-2 looks really good, but are they actually as good as 6-2 looks?
No, they're not. I think they finally got exposed against Seattle. I think Giants and Seattle was a game of two teams, again, that have overperformed expectations. What the Giants have done has been incredible, has been impressive. If I'm a Giants fan, I am ecstatic about the future. I am ecstatic about the fact that we got to 6 wins this season. If you were a Giants fan, you were hoping to get to 6 wins this season. Over the course of a 17 game season, you were hoping and praying you got to 6, 7 wins. Here you are at 6-2. It's going to be a rougher close of the season because I think they're going to, have the world catch up with them a little bit. But who cares? Like they've overperformed. No, I don't think they're that good. But I think that Giants fans and the Giants in general should be very proud. They have the number 28 ranked offensive line right now. Okay, they've had the advantage of a soft schedule on their side, which has immensely helped them. It's not going to get that much harder moving forward, maybe a smidge harder. But I do think Daniel Jones is going to have those games. They have to hold these teams under 20, 25 points to win. And if that's really hard to do consistently in the NFL, if they don't do that, it's kind of game over. We don't see them consistently put up points with that number 25 graded offense. That's just going to lead to them having some really, really ugly, tough weeks where, giving up 27 points to a Seattle offense that has been really good and really efficient is a good day, honestly. That's not bad at all. Going out there and only giving up 27 points to this Seattle team. We talked about them earlier, how efficient and good they've been from an offensive standpoint this season. And they could only hang 13 points against been a terrible, terrible defense. That's going to be the problem. What Dabo has done is incredible. That's not going to change. If the Giants lose 10 more games, what they did through the first 8 weeks of this season was nothing short of incredible. But they're not a legit team. They're not a contender. They're just not. They have a very bright future. They've got some guys turning around. But on the bright side, I mean, yeah, they got a bye this week, but they got the Texans. Then they got the Lions. They go to Dallas. Then they got Washington. 3 of their next 4 games are, I think even against Dallas, it's potentially winnable. They have very winnable games. So I think they get to 9, 10 wins, but they're not legit. They've just had an incredible run to open this season. So that's where I sit with the Giants. And I think eventually it's going to kind of balance out. But yeah, I mean, if they sneak in, the NFC is so bad, they may end up winning 10, 11 games getting into the playoffs. But if the Bucs squeak into the playoffs and so do the Giants, I mean, who are you taking in that wild card game, right? Like, it's kind of like, okay, who's got a legit chance? I'm not trying to go back to my Bucs argument. I mean, I'm just saying that's the perspective on how different their seasons are to date and what a playoff run will look like versus basically a Super Bowl win for the Giants, whereas other teams, it's like barely meeting expectations. So that's where I sit with them. On your Cincinnati argument, I don't very much disagree. Chase should be back in 2 to 3 weeks. He's not going to be out that long. From what I've heard, they didn't put him on IR. He should be back in a couple weeks. So I think Cincinnati will be fine. They just still look like they're on a hangover. The argument I had for them earlier this season remains the same. Coming into this season on a Super Bowl loss, they have these weeks where they just look like they're on a hangover. And we see that year in and year out with a lot of these teams that come off of a Super Bowl loss. It's really tough to be consistent, at this point. So if Baltimore can continue closing out games like they did the last couple of weeks, that'll be solid for them. And I do think they win the division. I thought they would come into this season. So no arguments there in regards to those teams. What other thoughts you got for me?
Yeah, I got 2 more teams for you, and we've talked about them a couple of times, and I think the first one we actually did talk about today, and that's the Vikings. I think, like you said earlier, they're kind of running away with this division, and I think it's time we take them a little more seriously. I don't think we looked at them as a serious contender, kind of coming even into this week, but their record says that they are, and they're in an NFC, conference that it's not. I wouldn't say it's wide open, but it's certainly open for a team to make a run that most people didn't think could. And I think this Vikings might be that team. Like they might be that team that surprises you, wins their division, makes a little bit of run in the playoffs. We've also seen them look really bad against the Eagles. Like the Eagles took care of them with ease. So I'm curious to see how legit the Vikings really are. But I think we got a little bit more, especially with that record. It kind of speaks for their success this year. And then the last team, we've talked about the Ravens quite a bit, and the Ravens are still hanging on. We just said, both of us said, we think they're gonna make the playoffs one way or the other, whether they win the division or get a wild card. I think they're gonna make the playoffs, and they just got a huge pickup in Roquan Smith. I mean, I think he's one of the best linebackers in the league, and they just got him from the Bears, so that's definitely a big plus. And again, like they could very well be. I mean, what are they right now? They're 5-3. They could be 7-1. Like they lost 2 really close games that they just didn't finish. Like they could be 7-1 right now. We could be having them in the real calm, like talking about them being on the same level as the Bills, Chiefs, and Eagles, but they just didn't finish early in the year, and that's going to be the key for them moving forward. I've said that already. I'm going to continue to say it. It's just consistency, staying consistent throughout the remainder of the year, the back half of the year, stringing some wins together, and then bringing that, because they do have a dangerous roster, and I think they can make a run.
100%. Baltimore, they just have to close out games. Really, no stance on my end has changed. I think they're a very talented team. I think they're one of the only teams that can make a Super Bowl run outside of Bills, Chiefs in that AFC, who could really give them a run for their money. They just got to learn how to close games. That's all it comes down to. To your point about Minnesota, Minnesota's been a lot of fun to watch. They've been very fun. I was surprised to see them only as 3-point favorites this week against Washington, but they've when it comes down to team grades, again, we like to look at these, just say, okay, how at an individual level, how is this team performing? And I mean, a really good offense. The defense is graded out as top 10. And overall they've graded out as the number 4 overall team. I think that's really, really impressive. They're sitting at 6-1. I think we know how we feel about Kirk Cousins in prime time in those big spots at the end of the season. But when it comes down to regular season, I mean, at this point, I think they may run away with this division. Their schedule does get a little more difficult, so watch for potentially that to balance out. We'll see if they leave a door open for Green Bay, if they can turn it around. But they should win against Washington this week. But then they do have a bit of a gauntlet with Buffalo, Dallas. New England's always tough, no matter how bad they are. But outside of that, they should be able to get to about 11 wins and win their division. And NFC is so bad they could be in contention for a bye that first week. So I'm with you there on Minnesota. I think what they've done is very impressive. It's time to take them serious. If they can keep this up, it's going to be, they're going to start moving into that. Okay, could they be a for real team? I don't think you and I could ever really get there with Kirk Cousins, but they're trending more in that direction than they are in any other direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I said, it's just someone to look out for. But that kind of rounds out our list. So going into week 9, I'm excited. We'll see, how things play out, how, if people move around when we talk about this next week. But there's a lot of stuff still up in the air that I think we need to get answers for. And I think we'll only get those answers as we go through the weeks, obviously. So excited to see it. Got any final thoughts? I mean, that's it for me. I'm just looking forward to another week. I'm not looking forward to the Jets playing the Bills. That is one thing I forgot to mention. I am a little scared for the Jets, so we will see how that happens.
Yeah, I know. Jets coming crashing down to earth. Honestly, what you guys have done this year, though, is really been impressive. Should definitely be proud of that. But this is definitely a fun one. Week 9 is going to be telling for a couple of these teams. I think Rams Bucs is a pivotal game. Loser of that game could potentially. I think if the Rams lose, their season is borderline over. The Bucs, the only reason their season's not over is because they're in one of the worst divisions of football. But that's a game where that could potentially really tank someone's season. So that's going to be interesting for me to see two teams that we would expect to be closer to 5-3, 6-2 playing. So let's see what happens there. And I'm looking forward to another fun week, man. I appreciate you. It's good to have you back on. I think this has been a great episode, one of our best with the back and forth. Appreciate you hopping on here. And everyone else knows where you can go find him at Rob McW24 on Twitter. You can find me at Cody Engel. Check us out at Roster Up Media on all social handles and rosterupmedia.com. We dropped several shows in here where some of those guys are covering their individual teams. If you're a fan of an individual team, go check us out, see if we got that. Check out one of our podcasts. And if we don't cover your team, let us know if you're interested or know someone who wants to join us here at Roster Up Media. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in. Rob, enjoy some football, my man.
Hey, brother.